Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us and welcome to another WIN Science webinar. The title of today's webinar is Highlighting CROs Focused on Women's Health. We have a wonderful panel today of various CROs we're excited to welcome. But before we start today's topic, I'd like to share with you a little bit about WIN's Women in Nutraceuticals vision and mission. The vision of WIN is to achieve economic and social equality in the global nutraceutical industry. And to achieve this, the mission is WIN offering tools, networking, visibility, and mentoring to create an environment where women have an equal place in the leadership and evolution of the global nutraceutical industry, and where they can reap equally personal fulfillment, social, and economic benefits. The core focus areas for WIN are leadership, increasing the number of women serving in leadership positions, growth, grow the number of women in science and research, investment, expand investment opportunities for female businesses, and opportunity, ensure better opportunities for rising female leaders. WIN has been around now for 2.5 years, and we're very, very proud of our accomplishments thus far. We've launched and completed a pilot mentorship program that included 15 mentor-mentee pairs and attended 6 academic and scientific conferences. We've hosted a lot of events, industry events, networking events in many cities across the country. We've launched virtual networking sessions, and we've grown our online presence to 6,000 LinkedIn followers. We also have resources that have been serving our members very well, including an industry job board that I encourage you all to check out if you haven't already. So a few housekeeping items for today's webinar. This webinar is live now, but will be available on demand. Please check the WIN member portal to find this webinar after today's recording. And if you have any questions as the webinar progresses, I really encourage you to enter them in the Q&A tab. We will have a 10-minute Q&A session at the end of our discussion with the panelists. If you have any technical issues, our technical lead, Tracy Kontowski, will be here to help you. So please enter those in the chat box, okay, not the Q&A box. Those are 2 separate items. Please keep that in mind. And we hope that you really enjoy and get the most out of this webinar today. At this time, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome our panelists. I will go through and introduce them one by one. First, it's my pleasure to welcome Zara Liew. Zara is the Director of Clinical Partnerships at Lindus Health, where she combines her passion for women's health with her expertise in clinical trials. With a background in strategy consulting, she has guided both biotechs, medtechs, and big pharma in bringing therapies to market across various therapeutic areas. Zara holds degrees in biomedical sciences and public health with published research on HIV in The Lancet. At Lindus Health, she focuses on empowering women's health entrepreneurs, guiding them through the strategic thinking and execution of trials needed to bring their innovations to life. Welcome, Zara. We also have joining us today Stephanie Anne Girard. She is the Director and Scientific Affairs at SGS Nutrasource. Dr. Stephanie Anne Girard, Director of Scientific Affairs in SGS Nutrasource, brings over 15 years of clinical research expertise in natural health products, dietary supplements, and pharmaceuticals, with experience in women's health, among other therapeutic areas. She leads the development of high-quality scientific documents, data interpretation, and clinical trial design, working closely with teams across biostatistics, medical writing, and regulatory affairs. With a Ph.D. in nutritional sciences, she has published extensively and presented internationally, supporting scientific rigor and regulatory compliance for client projects. Welcome, Stephanie Anne. We also have joining us today Jessie Hawkins, who is the founder and president of Nutraceuticals Research Institute. Dr. Hawkins is a Harvard-trained clinical researcher with over 20 years of experience in the natural products field. She established what is now known as the Nutraceuticals Research Institute in 2005 as an independent educational center and has overseen its growth and transition to an academically focused contract research organization for the natural products industry. She has helped hundreds of thousands of families achieve healthier lives through her multiple published books, speaking engagements, and online resources. Welcome, Jessie. Thank you for joining us. And finally, it is my pleasure to welcome Danielle Mitchell. Danielle Mitchell is an experienced clinical research professional bringing diversity and transformative change to one of the most critical industries. She is the CEO and founder of Black Women in Clinical Research. And through Black Women in Clinical Research, Black Men in Clinical Research, and Minorities in Clinical Research, Danielle has helped countless professionals expand their reach and opportunities. The organization currently has over 15,000 active members dedicated to its mission to educate, empower, support, and help Black women, men, and minorities thrive in the clinical research industry. Thank you so much for joining us, Danielle. Welcome to all of our panelists. I think I welcome you now to unmute so we can hear your wonderful voices and perspectives around some of these questions around CROs and how they help to address women's health. So to begin with our first question today, I wanted to get your views on why you think it's important for a CRO to specialize in women's health. And I'll start with you, Zara. What do you think?
Great. So, from my experience working at Lindus Health, where we touch upon so many therapeutic areas, what I really noticed is that within women's health, it's such a space that is, in recent years, really garnering more and more attention. So to really miss out is actually quite a shame for CROs and missed opportunities. What comes to my desk is frequently, innovations around menopause, fertility, IVF procedures. And so there's a massive growth there to not, jump at. But also within the conditions we do know, there's such an unmet need to investigate in these areas. So even with osteoporosis in postmenopausal women, or how ADHD manifests differently in women versus men, there's such an often overlooked area of research, which I think, really specialist CROs can tackle. So why kind of a really specialist CRO in these areas? It's also around understanding, women and how to get them participating in trials. So it's really on, how do you speak to women? How do you recruit them? How do you tailor a trial where it's gonna, number one, be really appealing for them to take a part in, but also fit within the day-to-day lifestyle and be easy for them to take part in. But yeah, happy to hear the other panelists' views on this as well.
Yeah, well said. So certainly we have seen a lot of growth. What have you seen, Stephanie Ann?
So basically, yeah, to echo what Zara's saying, CROs really drive clinical research. CROs are the experts in clinical research. So underrepresentation of women, especially in nutritional clinical research, it continues to be a significant issue and it needs to be addressed. And I think that it's for us as an industry to really push and ensure that sponsors who are not necessarily well versed in clinical research or even women's health, making them aware of the consequences of not including women in clinical research.
Mhm.
There is a lot of times not, no need to exclude them, and then the claims that they can make following their clinical trial will be impacted by the fact that women were not included or underrepresented. So today I represent a CRO, but in my past life, I was a sponsor. But most importantly, I'm a scientist. And so the scientific community also needs to come together and rectify this imbalance. In terms of women's health, like women have very different needs, nutritional needs, and there are different stages of life. So mentioned before, menopause, and there are hormone fluctuations throughout the month as well. And we have a better idea now of how hormones fluctuate. And we do have tools that are available to us now to be able to take into account estrogen throughout the month for women and include the variations of estrogen into the statistical analysis. So there are really sophisticated generalized linear mixed models where you could include covariates in there, and estrogen could be a covariate to see if there's an impact on the primary outcome you're measuring. So really to exclude women because there are hormonal fluctuations, it's a shame, and it's definitely, you know, as a scientific community, industry, as a CRO, we need to come together. Um, so yes, I could keep on going, but
Oh, well
I'll let
said. Yeah, we will keep on going, in fact.
yes,
So yeah, no, but I'm hearing you saying that yes, we've had an unmet need, right? Because there's this gap in knowledge. And what's happening, I'm hearing, is maybe the CROs are also driving the evolution of some of the tools that we
yes.
need to solve these problems, some of them real, some of them perceived, to help to drive that closing of the gap. That's a great. What and how about you, Jessie? What is your take on, what is the role of CROs in supporting women's health and why they should specialize in women's health?
I mean, I think including women in research, as we've already discussed, is critical. It's not the mid 1900s anymore. We can't claim ignorance in terms of the harm that actually produces when we take research conducted on men and try and generalize it to women. We know that doesn't work. We know it leads to wildly inaccurate conclusions. We've seen that in pharmaceuticals. We've seen it in public health and prevention. But specifically, a CRO should go a step further, not just including women in research, but specializing in women in research for the exact same reasons. If we can't take findings from men and generalize them to women, we can't take methodologies for those studies and generalize them to women. And I mean, that's been touched on with the different phases of reproductive health. And I know you and I say this all the time. It's not that men don't have hormones. It's the cycles of those hormones are different in men than in women. And so looking at those unique factors, the unique lived experiences of being female, and then having methodology research tools that are specific to that population. And a big reason to specialize in that is also so that you don't get those false negatives. Because what you're going to have is noise in your data. You're going to have data that's not useful. And ultimately, you're going to get results that don't have a lot to do with the research question you meant to be asking.
Mm-hmm. Well said. I love that. So don't just include women, but specialize, create those tools, really drive those solutions. Danielle, we come to you. I would love to hear from you. Why do you think it's important for CROs to specialize in women's health?
I really echo what all of the ladies have said. There isn't a lot of clinical trials that are focused on women. And when we know that majority of the clinical trials, men are the clinical trial participants. That's just facts. And that the males that are participating in the clinical trials are white males. So not only is, when it comes to the clinical trials, that we're not looking at the different races when it comes to women as well. So that is something that we really need to address. Every woman's body is different. So we can't even say, okay, well, this person is from this type of background. And so all of these drugs are going to work because she's a woman. That is not the case. We need people showing up in every culture, every race, so that we can test the drugs on different women so that we can see that these drugs are working, that they're safe and effective for all women. And I always like to share my own personal story as well. I recently found out that I have fibroids. So I went down a rabbit hole, went on clinicaltrials.gov, tried to find a lot of clinical trials that were focused on fibroids. And what I found is that majority of the studies were not open to accrual. So what happens, especially when women are looking for these clinical trials, some people say, oh, well, clinicaltrials.gov is not the best place to look for clinical trials. Where is the best place for women to look for clinical trials that is focused on just women? And I thought this, right before our call, I was like, we need to probably create something that is women focus for clinical trials so that women have a space where they can find clinical trials that's focused just for them. If we really want to promote more clinical trials for women, that is something that we need to build. And I'm very big on, if it's not there, build it yourself. And so maybe all of the ladies in us need to come together and do that, because we have to provide those resources for women, especially because women don't know that these exist. So we have to have that resource for them. So that is something that I was just thinking about. But yeah, we really need to do a better job with having clinical trials that's focused on women. I was a clinical research coordinator, and it wasn't until I worked for a company that was owned by a woman, a woman-owned CRO, that I was in my first clinical trial that was for women. Before that, I was a clinical research coordinator for breast oncology. But outside of that, the CRO, I was working on a study that was for a female sexual arousal disorder, which I had no idea this, clinical trials like this existed until I was actually a part of this clinical trial. So it really opened up my eyes. I read the protocol from front to back. But it was so interesting to me. And the fact that I didn't even know that these type of clinical trials or even existed.
A great point. I think you're touching on this point of accessibility, right? Which I think Zara also mentioned earlier in our conversation. How do we make this information accessible so that women can take advantage of these tools? And then creating the tools if they don't exist, whether they're clinical design tools or tools to help make this information more accessible, or participation in clinical trials more transparent and easier to find, so we can drive that change, both as clinicians and people in the industry, and as, participants as well. I mean, no one's more motivated than participants, right? I think for their own health, they have a lot of skin in the game. So great insights from you all. Thank you so much. And I think before we move on to the second question, I wanted to check in with our audience. We do have a poll question. We wanted to know, have you engaged in women's health research? And some of the options, and have you worked with CROs specifically? So the first answer is, I've worked with at least one CRO on this topic already. I've done women's health research, but never with a CRO. And I am new to conducting women's health research and am looking for options. If you have a different answer and you'd like to share your specific point of view, you're welcome to click other, and please type in your answer in the chat. So we'll just give you a minute here to answer. Okay. Okay, we have some responses. Amazing. So it looks like a lot of people have a different experience, but about equal distribution between having worked with a CRO and not having worked with a CRO, but at least having curiosity to do so. So that's interesting. So I think we can probably, that means everyone here can benefit from learning a little bit more about the different types of CROs. I mean, you're all coming from different spaces and you have different areas of specialization, different capabilities, and probably different methods of conducting your clinical research. So it'll be great to hear the different ideas here in this virtual room and understand a little bit about how you differentiate yourselves in the industry in terms of the services that you provide and how you connect both with the customers and with the participants in the studies. So let's move on with that in mind to the second question, which is, what advantages does collaborating with a CRO offer in reaching more women and addressing the knowledge gap in women's health research? And please focus on what your CRO in particular brings as a point of difference. So with that, we'll start with Danielle.
I would say that we really need to look at education, educating different like patient advocacy groups. I think a lot of times we don't really tap into the patient advocacy groups. So I would say when it comes to CROs, really using those patient advocacy groups to let them know about the opportunities, and to even look at professional organizations that are geared towards women as well, when it comes to really trying to bridge that knowledge gap. And like I mentioned earlier, a lot of women don't know that these clinical trials exist. So being able to be that resource for women that are out there searching, because I was searching, and I know that there's other women out there that are searching when it comes to their health. So just making sure that there is a open line of communication when it comes from the CROs and what kind of women's studies, are available to people. So I think it really starts with educating and having that open line of communication.
That's great. And Danielle, I know that you coordinate a lot of private clinical research sites. Can you tell us a little bit about what advantages working with those private sites gives to someone running a study?
Absolutely. So I have another organization where I'm the co-founder of called Nora Research Collective, and we are a site network of private sites who conduct clinical trials. And so a lot of our principal investigators are diverse principal investigators, and the sites are located in diverse populations. So these sites are able to reach a different, I would say, demographic area versus large academic institutions that conduct clinical trials. So it is really important that the small sites are being considered to participate in clinical trials. What we've seen so far with Nora Research Collective and the sites that approach us is that they are not given the same opportunities as larger sites. And so I encourage CROs and sponsors to really look at those smaller sites, those, sites that, just give them a chance, because a lot of them are trying to be involved in clinical research, but they need a sponsor and they need a CRO to say, you know what, we're going to site select you. Or even if they're not selected, give them reasons as to why they weren't selected and tell them things that they can work on for the next time.
Yeah. And before we move on to the next speaker, I just want to note, it's interesting. You mentioned to me earlier in our conversations that you work and these site coordinators work primarily with pharmaceutical industry, which conduct very, very large trials and so may skew bias towards larger clinical sites. But there's a unique situation here in the nutraceutical industries. Well, very often we're conducting smaller trials. Speaking for myself, the company that I work for is an ingredient manufacturer with certainly not the same budget as a pharmaceutical company. And so the studies that we run are typically smaller. And it sounds like these kind of private sites give us an added advantage potentially to access certain populations that we typically may not in an academic setting out of a university lab where we typically access, young, healthy, college-age men and women. So that's an interesting area that I think Stephanie Ann touched on when she was talking about the diversity of people that we're recruiting into clinical studies. So just wanted to highlight that. Maybe there's a great connection here with the nutraceutical industry and some of these private research sites. So with that, I also wanted to get some insight on this from Jessie. I know that you think about this a lot in your day-to-day work. So can you tell us a little bit about how it is that collaborating with your CRO in particular can help reach more women and close the knowledge gap?
Absolutely. So, I mean, one of the benefits of collaborating with any CRO is you're going to get access to that expertise that I mentioned earlier, that specific expertise working with a female population and all of the complexity that had us excluded from clinical trials to begin with decades ago. We exclusively work with nutraceuticals. So basically our entire process is kind of CRO turned upside down. We don't collaborate with individual sites. We have our own network, and kind of echoing the importance of that educational component. Nutraceuticals are a field where there is an incredible lack of education for the consumers, just in terms of what they're looking for, how to interpret all of that. So we have this sort of twofold approach where we're conducting the research, but also educating the consumers as well, and using those components to kind of work together. And then those consumers, who are the actual people buying the supplements, are the ones who are participating in the study. So we focus on prioritizing those real world effects. Another benefit is you're going to get better measurement tools for those endpoints. I mentioned how everything is really about that biomarker, that endpoint that you're looking at. But so many nutraceuticals focus on intangible things that really are going to be best measured through PROs, patient-reported outcomes. And when we look at most PROs, they're developed for the pharmaceutical industry. Most of them are screening tools to see if we need to do further tests. They're not developed to measure change on factors like stress. And when we talk about stress or when we talk about menopause, we're talking about lived experiences that females experience. So you need psychometrics that measure those and can accurately capture that change within that population. One example I like to give is kind of before this recent surge in including women is how we measured menopause. The kind of gold standard was the menopause rating scale, the MRS, which was designed to be administered by your care provider. So your care provider was the expert on your level of vaginal dryness. Obviously, you're not going to get a good study out of that. So having those tools are really going to dramatically change your results.
Amazing. What you mentioned surge in including women in clinical studies. Is that something that you've seen personally in your CRO?
We have, especially really, I mean, since the launch of WIN, really just the last few years in particular. I don't know if that's just, helped more people be more vocal about it. I mean, it's happening across the board, but we are having more and more people reach out that they're launching women-specific lines. I think the message change is slow, but I think the message is finally getting out there that we do need women included in these studies, and the studies need to be built for women.
Mhm. Amazing. Wow. It's yeah, that's exciting. I won't go into whether that's a correlation or causation, but it is nice to see that, things are moving in concert. There's some coordination there.
Yep.
And Stephanie Ann, can you talk a little bit about your CRO and what specializes you, why you chose to specialize in women's health and what tools you bring to this arena?
Yeah, sure. So, to echo what Jessie was saying, I mean, there's a clear advantage of working with a CRO. We have the expertise, we bring that to the table. And just to speak to SGS Nutrasource and our expertise, so I mean, our combined team has been involved in more than 1,300 clinical trials, in women's health, but also in all health segments. And something interesting too is that although we may not be selected to run a clinical trial, we do get to bid or, to work on proposals. So we do get a good idea of the different trends observed in the nutraceutical industry. So although we may not necessarily win the trial, we do get to see what comes in and what sponsors are looking at. So we do get to see the trends. So that's an advantage of collaborating with us. In a certain degree as well, we do get to help in the decision-making process, the budgeting. We do get to educate the sponsors and also get a better idea of their pipeline. Another thing also that's very important, when selecting a CRO, there are many CROs available. A lot of them have expertise, in women's health or other areas. But what's important to remember is it's not necessarily what the company has done in the past, but who's currently at the company and the expertise that they bring to the table. So in CROs and clinical research, there's a high turnover in staff. So just because the CRO did a study in the past on women's health or looking at menopause, it doesn't mean that the current team has the expertise that is needed to build and design a strong clinical trial, right? So doing a bit of research when selecting a CRO and seeing, what current employees they have, what they bring to the table. So our team currently has expertise in women's health, looking at sexual wellness, menopause, UTIs. Current team members have done studies on breast health, vaginal health, so bacterial vaginosis, candidiasis. Studies looking at the vaginal microbiome, beauty from within, some cosmetic trials, pregnancy, breastfeeding. So also, another thing to look at when selecting a CRO, you're selecting a partner, an extension of your company, right? So within the organization itself, it's very important to see the women representation, especially in position of leadership, right? So, at our CRO, we have, women that are project managers, myself, the scientific director, we have medical writing team, where we have a strong female presence, clinical trial management team. So actually 80% of the women leading the science in our CRO are women. So that's very important because ultimately, as women, we can determine what is truly important to us and what are the outcomes that matter. Also within the CRO, it's important to have a diverse group in terms of ethnicity, right? Within the team itself, the diversity of the staff. So that's going to help on multiple aspects, could help with the study design, but also the recruitment. So building the recruitment material, right? If you want to have a diverse participant population, you need to take these things into consideration. So SGS Nutrasource, we're located in Canada. So I bring the Canada perspective. We're 1 hour outside of Toronto. And the good thing about Canada is that we have a very diverse population. We do have a database also. We have over 13,000 participants in our database that we can pull from. And we do have a site in-house, Apex Trials. But we do not necessarily run our trials always in-house. So I would say only 30% of our trials are conducted in-house at our site. We use a site network that we have, over 400 sites that is in our network through North America and Europe. So, and that's going to be very study dependent. So it's not a one size fit all. If it doesn't make sense to run the trial at our site in Canada, we will not do it there. We have like a network. It's important to select a CRO that has a good network that they can pull on. And also, lastly, I don't want to take too much time, but some CROs like ourselves have regulatory groups. So it's important to know the regulatory landscape in the different countries, what can be studied, and then what can be claimed following your studies and your results. It's different in different countries. And so having that in-house expertise is also very useful for our sponsors.
Yeah, very, very interesting. All great points. Interesting. One of the things you said is that you do have insight into trends. So I wondered if, similar to what I asked Jessie, if you could share, if you're able to share
Share my
in the
secret.
last few years. Yes, what have you seen in terms of women's health trends? Would be interesting to know.
Yeah, I think, aging population. So, menopause is a big one right now. And also the trend, the GLP-1 trend, right?
Mhm.
GLP-1 agonist, that's really big. The obesity pandemic, that's, throughout the world. So we're seeing a lot of sponsors coming to us, and also sponsors that want to do a trial on their product as a whole instead of piggybacking on the claims that are already existent for the individual ingredients. So companies are now realizing that they need to have really strong clinical trials on their product to be able to differentiate themselves on the market. So some of the trends we're seeing right now.
Exciting times for CROs then. And Zara, I'll come back to you now. What do you think the advantages of collaborating with Lindus Health in particular and CROs in general are for women's health and closing that knowledge gap?
Yeah, and I think I just want to say I completely agree with Stephanie, where, as Lindus, we're a little bit of the new kids on the block in the CRO industry, but it really is about the experience of your team. So if there's, any advice, it's really meet the team that you're going to work with as soon as possible to get that expertise, but also just to figure out, do you vibe? Can you work with them? Do they think the same way? It's a lot of kind of dating in that way with CROs. But in saying that, with Lindus being the new kid on the block, the way that we approach things is that we want to use technology to deliver our trials and outcomes faster. So the kind of philosophy for us, and when we were built, it was really of how can we make getting therapeutics, nutraceuticals to market almost as easy as launching a new tech platform on software. So not costing crazy amounts or being super hard to contract loads of sites and having all these barriers in place. So in terms of the advantages of working with us as a CRO for women's health, it really is, how do we make trials as seamless as possible to fit within people's lifestyles? And so, with the knowledge of, women and different patient groups, it really is how do we execute so that, they want to take part and they're not going to drop out. So there are some things that naturally, women in the 30s who are taking part in studies where a lot of the child caring responsibilities fall upon them. The school runs, for example, if we launch an ePro that's timed at, 8 o'clock in the morning, no one's going to answer it, or whatever time that, children go to school. I'm not probably there just yet in my life, so I'm a bit oblivious to these things. But it's kind of those, learnings of, okay, what's the live reality and how can we design trials in a way that people want to take part and will stay in the trial? And so we've conducted, several trials in supplements one for supplements to help with hot flash, where it was completely decentralized. And so women were allowed to take part in the studies from, from their home. And we were recruiting them through various channels where we know that potentially these sorts of women aren't going to sites to see their GPs for certain problems. Maybe we recruit them entirely off social media. So, TikTok, we've done ads on our Instagram. And even if it's seeing their GPs, we do have a network of around 30 million EHR records across the UK and the US, where we can actually figure out from, the medical records, the inclusion exclusion criteria, and specifically target those women. And I think, another aspect where it's really great to have further insight on using tech is that we've actually generated AI profiles in the past. So you can actually have really cool prompts and create this is Sarah. Sarah has heavy menstrual bleeding. And it's a really quick way for us to think about what are the challenges this profile might face? Why would they be interested in a trial? And given all these different scenarios and factors around this profile that we have generated, how do we factor that into how we design a trial, but also execute? So yeah, it's not always just about the outcomes, though it's really important which ones you select. It's also about how do you execute to keep people within the study once you've already reached out to them.
Amazing. You touched on so many interesting points there. So first of all, what you and Stephanie Ann both said is look at the team itself, look at the skill set, the people, their academic backgrounds, that the tools that they have today. That's very interesting. And I really liked what you touched on, the different ways of communicating, how is the CRO reaching out to the participants? Because you do want a good, strong recruitment, diverse recruitment, and you do want to be able to retain. So understanding, as you said, that lived experience is so important. And that's why the makeup of the team, as Stephanie Ann also suggested, and I believe you also alluded to, having that representation there so that they can understand the lived experience of the participants you're trying to recruit is so important. And super interesting about AI. I love how everybody's just using AI for just creative ways of using AI, new tools, right? So in all aspects, I think, we always, Jessie and I have spoken before about doing assessments. What are the needs? What are people's needs? You have to ask them directly, ask broadly, ask often, ask loudly, and take that feedback into your design. Doing it through AI is such a creative, interesting way of trying to get at those ideas. And it does sort of nicely transition into my next question, which is about the future. Trying to understand, how you envision CROs evolving to address the growing and complex needs of women's health. So where are we going? What are the exciting things that we can look forward to CROs heralding some change or new developments? And I'm going to start with Jessie on this one.
So, change is slow. So I think we're getting there and seeing some of these things, but it takes time. A big one, obviously, is the trend towards inclusion. And I think we've done a relatively successful job over the last few decades of communicating women have to be included in clinical trials, and also that we can't just throw women and men into clinical trials together and call it inclusion. We have to have sex-specific analyses.
Mm-hmm.
A next step from that, obviously, is what Danielle is doing and making sure we have more diversity. So we're not just getting a very, homogenous group of women, throwing them into studies and calling it inclusion, where we're actually looking at a lot of these diverse differences that we have among women. And I think another area where we're really going to start to see that is, just necessity is we're going to have to start seeing changes in methodology. I mentioned, and I like to harp on, the outcome measurements and making sure that we're using outcome measurements that are actually fit for purpose, that are actually measuring what we want to measure. And I love to kind of compare that to when you're baking. If your scale is off, you could be the best baker in the world, but what you produce is not going to be great. And a clinical trial is all about data. And so if we don't have the correct data, if we're not getting data that is relevant it doesn't matter what other tools we throw at it. We've got to have the actual outcome that's related to what the product can do so that we can capture that change that we see. And we're starting to see a lot of interest in that, in more specificity, in more inclusion in our studies, in more diversity in our studies. And really, that's going to give us a lot more information about not just what these products can do, but who specifically they can help, where it helps certain subpopulations more than other populations. We can get more specificity in those claims that are associated with that. And then also more specificity in how we're actually addressing these problems. You know, we can say stress reduction, but we can also look at it's helping with the physical effects of stress reduction, or it's helping with the cognitive effects, and really drill down into a lot of that, just better quality studies overall.
Okay. Having a good toolkit in terms of the endpoints and things
Yeah.
that you're looking at. Yeah, well, great. Okay. And Zara, what are your thoughts coming back to you on where are CROs headed? What can we look forward to them bringing in the future that will help with women's health research?
Yeah, I think for me, I would love to see CROs giving their expertise and kind of pushing back on sponsors to have, these patient-led designs and outcomes there. So, having let's say you have really, really heavy menstrual cycles, that maybe an outcome is something like pain-free days, where you're really looking at, the outcomes that matter to women, but also, collecting, more data that has more nuance around, the biological differences of women. So I know that a lot of clients are kind of requesting, can you track their fertility through their Aura ring, or what's the best trackers to use? And so we've done a lot of assessments of, okay, if we want to detect sleep, this is the best one for it. But if we want to try and detect, when they're ovulating, this is the best wearable. And, right now there isn't one wearable that's great for all of the different measurements we want to find out, but hopefully that's kind of where it's leading to have more rich data. So when you have, certain outcomes, you might be able to link them with, your cycle or whatnot. But, having wearables in trials sounds great, but often the word integrations, and I'll get slapped on the wrist from our technical team, never to promise an integration, but it's a lot harder than meets the eye in many cases, but the data that can provide is super rich.
That's interesting. So we talked a little bit earlier, Danielle mentioned about building the tools that don't exist for us. Do you think that there's any opportunity for CROs to partner with companies that might build the right wearable devices for CROs specifically to use?
Yeah, I
Yes.
mean,
Oh, sorry. I thought you, oh, sorry.
Go ahead. I mean,
No,
yes,
no, no. Go ahead. I
go
thought when
ahead,
you
Zara,
said
and then we'll come
Danielle,
back.
yes.
We'll come back to you, Danielle, on this. I feel like
Okay.
I love when eyes pop open like that. Go ahead. Yes, Zara, and then we'll go to Danielle.
no worries. I think people are trying to actually start developing those tools and actually reaching out to CROs to test these kind of algorithms there and make sure it's almost validated so that it then can be used in a clinical trial. It's mostly temperature related at the moment in time, so really curious to see how it might evolve or whether there's something more complex going on in the algorithms.
Yeah, we can talk about that more offline too, but I think that there's not just temperature, there's, I think, certain instruments that measure like parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous signals and things. There's interesting things happening. Danielle, what did you have to say about that type of building those tools?
So back in the day, in my early clinical research days, I worked kind of under, I would say, Google, where they were wearing wearable devices and they were, tracking your sleep and tracking, your heart rate and all of these different things. So there are some devices and tools out there, especially when it comes to the medical devices and the wearables as well. And I just see with the CROs developing more technology when it comes to apps. I was at a conference and they talked about a company called Hello Heart, where they said that this is the first app that is actually monitoring your heart and, a lot of when it comes to I guess when it comes to your overall health, like heart disease is like one of the number one killer for a lot of people. So they are trying to help people with, some of the symptoms that, and a lot of times this happens with women as well. We will have different symptoms and we might tell someone our symptoms, but we kind of, we kind of get a dismissed, just being honest, myself included. Like Zara was saying, when you tell someone, oh, I'm having a heavy period, or I'm having long periods, they will tell you, oh, you're just getting older. Like I'm in my 40s. So they're saying, oh, well, you're getting older. So your body is changing. So, not really knowing about the symptoms that women are having, and knowing when it's time to say, okay, I need to advocate for myself, and I need to say, oh, wait, this is not normal. But so many times, and growing up, a lot of times, women have been told, if you have a heavy cycle, or if you have a long cycle, this is normal. When in all actuality, it's not normal. And this is something that you should talk to your doctor about. So I really feel like being able to equip the women with these resources and knowing about their different symptoms, some of the symptoms with having fibroids, having back pain, frequent urination, like some of the things that, women, we don't really think, okay, well, that's a problem. But when you look at all of the symptoms combined together, you're like, okay, this possibly might mean that I have fibroids. But you don't always have someone telling you when you do have these symptoms that this is something that can occur. So I feel like the CROs will come out with this technology and will come out with different apps to help. And I know that there are some companies that are trying to help with people who have been medical gaslight with some of the symptoms that they have had, and just to have that information and be able to have that AI tool to enter in and say, okay, these are some of the symptoms that I have experienced. And then the system will really pretty much push out, okay, these are the tests that you need to ask your doctor. So I do see us, really evolving with that technology piece.
Amazing. Yeah. So initially, when we started talking about these instruments, I think we were touching more on accessibility, making data more accessible. But medical gaslighting is a really interesting second reason to have your reports and your subjective symptoms backed up by data. And I know that it's quite well documented. For example, In Doing Harm by Maya Dusenberry is a great book that talks about the history of that and how prevalent that is. Well, amazing. Do you have anything to add, Danielle? Because you were next on my list to talk about what's next. So do you feel like covers it, or is there anything that you want to touch upon in terms of what CROs can bring to the future of women's health research?
I really feel like we need to be open, especially with the CROs, open to collaborating and reaching out to, maybe new organizations or organizations that you haven't reached out to before. But when I think about clinical research and just how I stumbled, or I like to say clinical research found me, because I found out about it at a pool party of all places.
Wow.
But I feel like when it comes to clinical research, we need to go outside of the industry and really let other people know about clinical research as well. And so if we can broaden I would say our information and how we're educating people about clinical research, to me, that would be one of the best ways to really bring in different people from other industries so that we can make sure that we have, participation and for other companies to know about clinical research. And so the next clinical research professional doesn't have to find out about clinical research at a pool party, but they can have this information shared with them at their college or high school, middle school. But yeah, I think it really starts with introducing, people just all in general about clinical research early on.
Amazing. I mean, let's definitely keep talking about it at pool parties too, though. That sounds yeah. We want to have diverse communication, spread it everywhere. And so that's wonderful. Okay, Stephanie Ann, what do you see as the future? What's next for CROs?
Yeah, so basically, again, as CROs, we have the knowledge, the expertise. So, challenging the status quo, right? So, staying informed and up to date on scientific advancements, on new technologies that are available, new tools, but also educating. And for me, it's educating the sponsors because they also drive clinical research, right? They're paying, these are large investments, and so educating them. When thinking about specifically women's health, I like to challenge some of the decisions that are being made by sponsors when they want to conduct a menopause study and they want to exclude women that are undergoing hormonal replacement therapy in these trials. And, most of the time, there's really no reasoning behind this other than, okay, estrogen can impact the pharmacokinetics or can impact the mechanism. So, it's a bit of noise. We want to exclude those women. But if these women that are on hormone replacement therapy, if they've been on it for, let's say, more than a year at a stable dose, like why exclude them, right? If they're still experiencing symptoms, vasomotor symptoms, or any other symptoms, like having problems with sleep, so why not include them? They're the ones that could actually benefit the most from your dietary supplement, right? Additionally, in some of these studies, sponsors are going to want to exclude women that are suffering from menopause and that are, depressed, so taking antidepressants. So again, you're really narrowing down, the pool of women that could really benefit from your dietary supplement, and with no real good justification. Another topic that's really, and we didn't really touch on it today, but another topic that I'm really passionate about is in a lot of our dietary supplement clinical trial, we're excluding pregnant, breastfeeding, or planning on becoming pregnant women. And it comes down, I understand, to liability. I was a sponsor in my past life, so I do get that liability aspect. But we are excluding so many women between the age of 20 and 40, and we could really benefit from studying these dietary supplements that are most of the time available on the market, in the pharmacies, in the grocery stores, and they're probably already taking the product, but we're excluding them in the context of a clinical trial where we could really benefit and get more safety information. Pregnant women, a lot of concern about the safety of the woman, the safety of the fetus, but so they're excluded in these trials, and I think it's a shame, and I think a lot of it, it's for us as an industry, as CROs, to really, challenge status quo and kind of get sponsors on board, so we do get a lot of those women included that could benefit, right? So that's my little take on where I see the future and how we have to keep on educating sponsors, which will in turn, have products on the market and then, can pass on to the consumer.
Great insight. Thank you for bringing that up. And Danielle also mentioned collaboration, and I know that we have, a lot of different CROs represented here. They all bring different things to the table, and technically you're all competitors, but as we mentioned in the beginning of the conversation, there is an unmet need here, and it's a growing interest in a growing industry, and I think that there's room for everyone, and we need to have as many tools as possible in the end to serve the consumers and the patients. So I really appreciate having you all here today to have this discussion and talk about what we can all do together as an industry to address this need. So I think with that, I can maybe have some conclusions around what we discussed. We talked about some of the trends looking at menopause, fertility, also a lot of trying to include women's specific, what did you call it, Jessie? Real world patient outcomes. So reaching out in different ways, as Zara mentioned, lots of different ways to reach out and get those assessments from participants. So we're doing studies that are going to be relevant to them, because ultimately the goal is to substantiate claims and serve the consumer and help improve their health. So interesting to hear that the CROs are bringing tools to the table to do those assessments and suggest to the sponsors how to run those studies, what endpoints might be the most relevant, and addressing not just necessarily metabolites or measurable biochemical markers, but also looking at some of these questionnaires and trying to make them meaningful as possible, so that we're addressing everyone's lived reality, which was another term I liked. So in order to do that, we want to look to the future and try to anticipate. In the words of Wayne Gretzky, we got to skate to where the puck is going to be. So, right, shout out to my fellow Canadian. So to do that, we want to be able to anticipate the needs of women and look at those gaps. Interesting to note, I've heard it before. How do we share in that liability, and how do we provide tools to try and address some of the more sensitive populations that we're concerned about, pregnant, nursing, those expecting to be pregnant? So those all great points. I feel like we could certainly talk about this for many hours more. And I think that I hope that by looking at our CRO database, which is going to be launched at WIN, you'll be able to connect with each of the CROs represented here, our wonderful panelists, and many more as well, and have those conversations and get to know the teams as we discussed. And hopefully we'll see a huge spike, a continued spike in studies on women's health and more knowledge that we can share with our consumers and with our product developers so we can make great products and tools for everyone. So with that, we're going to move to the Q&A. Yes,
Can I
Danielle.
add one last thing because Stephanie
Please.
sparked this thought that I have as well. What I realize also with women's studies is that we are leaving women out that have a higher BMI. A lot of the studies will not, you can't participate in the clinical trial if your BMI is higher. And so I know that, the average woman is a size 14. So a size 14 woman, a lot of times on these clinical trials, cannot participate because those are some of the requirements for participating in the clinical trial.
Lots of head nods here. Thank you for bringing that up. And anything else to come? We have about a minute before we need to go to Q&A. Anyone want to add to that?
I mean, it all comes down to, the dietary supplement industry and the fact that they want to include healthy participants, healthy female participants. Well, I say healthy because
Yeah.
there's no definition of healthy, right? So, so the BMI is a very fair point. I agree, challenging that as well. Good justification. It's not ethical to exclude a woman just because they're a certain BMI. And as mentioned, if the average, woman, they need to be included, right? So challenge may be the definition of healthiness in the dietary supplement industry and go to the regulators and challenge them. I didn't mention the regulators during this webinar, but yet a lot of work has to be done with them as well.
Yep.
FDA and trying to challenge the way they think and the way we're allowed to conduct our trials.
Yeah, I would go back and reference our audience to previous webinars on that included some work from the resilience research group at ODS. And we also had another webinar on accessibility, making trials more accessible to women. So both of these topics came up, more to say in some previous webinars. Now we'll go to our Q&A. So I think this sounds like a question maybe Danielle could start with it. How can a woman participate in a CRO? How is the selection of women conducted that participate in CROs?
So a lot of this comes with the sites. The sites are really responsible for making sure that people meet that eligibility criteria. So depending on what has been spelled out from the sponsor, that really determines who can participate in the clinical trial. So it really comes down what the protocol has written. So each clinical trial may be different on what that inclusion or what that exclusion criteria is for that clinical trial.
Okay, thank you. And another question here. From someone saying we're struggling with adoption of technology in decentralized clinical trials for osteoporosis in postmenopausal women. Any suggestions? Does anyone have a comment on that? Maybe technology. I'm not sure what specifically is meant by that, but maybe you have a general comment about how maybe this is an integration question, Zara, that you mentioned.
I think with decentralized trials, often, although we are very tech forward, it really is having the tech marry with the people. And so it's what we find it's really about this ongoing support. So the way in which we use tech and hopefully help it with adoption of new technologies or adherence really is to ideally have signals of non-adherence. And so when someone isn't answering their ePro or didn't show up to complete an assessment or something like that, it really is about having that connection in decentralized trials of having actually someone just call up and meet their trial coordinator. What we find is actually establishing a very much a human connection of, okay, if you like to be called this nickname, we're gonna call you that for the rest of the trial. We want you as involved, so that if, let's say, you start tapering off your adherence, or if you haven't filled out an assessment, you kind of feel bad because you're letting your TC down, kind of way. So, if it's a fact of that kind of adoption of, the assessments or using the technology itself, often, it's not really tech to fight it back. It's kind of the human aspects.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Okay. I mean, we have so many more questions, and I think if the panel is open to it, I can send you some of the questions that were left over. We could try to reach out to the individuals, because unfortunately unfortunately we ran out of time, but fortunately we had such a fruitful and interesting discussion. And I want to once again thank you all so much. I know I want to share real quick before we let everyone go. We have some upcoming events that I just wanted to tell you all about. So let me pop over to that slide. Please note that on November 21st and December 19th, we have some online WIN networking events. These are monthly events, and you can scan this QR code to participate. And also the next webinar, very interesting, will be on trends, positioning, and science behind formulating products for women. That will be on December 10th at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Please continue to check the WIN member portal for upcoming events and to access past recordings of webinars like this one, as well as to look for that CRO database I mentioned and the job board. These are all member exclusive resources. And please connect with us if you have any additional questions. You could reach out, whether it's about the panel discussion, about WIN, how to join WIN, how to participate, where we're going to be next. We encourage your engagement. And finally, once again, I want to really thank the panel. Thank you so much, all of you, for your participation, your insights. I really enjoyed our discussion, and I look forward to discussing with you all further offline. I know that you will be on the CRO portal, so anyone who wants to reach out will find your contact information there. Thank you all for your participation.
Thank you, Karen.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Thank you.